Hello everyone. Well, my presentation is about the DOM. The DOM stands for Document Object Model. We have already learned about it a little bit, but what is exactly the DOM? Well, the DOM is basically the same thing as your HTML document, but represented as a JavaScript object. The DOM is created until our web page is loaded into the browser. So the browser creates a document object model. The HTML DOM is a standard object model and programming interface for HTML. It defines the HTML element as objects, the properties of all HTML elements, the methods to access all HTML elements, the events for all HTML elements. In other words, the HTML DOM is a standard for how to get, change, add, or delete HTML elements. So the DOM represents and interacts with any HTML document. As well, it is synchronized with the HTML document. If we made a change to the HTML document, the change will also be made to the DOM, and vice versa. So, it is a representation of all the elements that make up a web page. It is the interface through which our script interacts with your HTML. The DOM represents the HTML document. It is a JavaScript object representation of the document. The DOM is a tree-like representation of the web that gets loaded into the browser. So, here I have an example of a HTML DOM tree of objects. We can see that it is the same as our HTML document. It has the same elements, the same names, the same content. So, it represents the web page using a series of objects. The main object is the document object, and this main object holds the other objects which also they hold their own objects, and so on. The HTML DOM has properties and methods which you can use to get information about the document using dot notation. So, with the object model, JavaScript gets all the power it needs to create anything on the HTML. With JavaScript, we can change all the HTML elements, we can change all the HTML attributes, we can change the CSS, we can remove existing HTML elements, we can add new elements, we can react to existing HTML events in the page, and we can also create new events. So here I have an example of a simple DOM manipulation. Here I have my HTML. In my HTML, I have a p tag. This p tag has an ID of daemon. So in this case, I want to set the text of this tag into hello world, like this. So first of all, in our JavaScript, we get into the document by writing document. Then we use dot notation, and then we use our method. My method in this case is get element by ID. Then again using dot notation, I use my property, and then I set my value. Let's talk a little bit about methods and properties. So how do we manipulate the DOM using methods and properties? The HTML DOM can be accessed with JavaScript. In the DOM, all HTML elements are defined as objects. The programming interface is the properties and methods of each object. A property is a value that you can get or set. A method is an action that you can do on the HTML element. So, to make an HTML document more interactive and dynamic, the script needs to be able to access to the contents of the document. We do that in here. So it does this by communicating with the browser using the properties and methods and events in the interface. So I want to make clear that the HTML methods are the actions that you can perform on the HTML elements, and the properties are the values of the HTML elements that we can set or change. So in this case, my method is get element by ID. This is the action. This is what I want to be done in this case. So I want to get the element by the ID. It's pretty obvious, right? So yeah, I want to get that element with the ID. I write the name of the ID. Then I use my property. In this case, we are using inner HTML. This property gets the content, the text content of the HTML element. But in this case, we are going to set a value. We're going to set that content into hello world. And that is what is happening here. First of all, it didn't have anything. In here, we don't have anything right, but we set it using DOM manipulation with JavaScript. Here you have another example, but in this case, we are modifying our CSS. Here you have two p tags. We are going to modify one to see the changes. So this is not going to be touched, but we're going to manipulate the one with the ID of P2. Again, we are using um, our method get element by ID. But when we are modifying CSS, we have to specify that we want to modify the CSS. We do this by using this style. With dot notation, we write style, and in this way, we are specifying that we are changing the CSS. So again, we get into our document. We use the method get element by ID to get our element. In this case, we are getting the P2 ID element, and we are specifying that we are getting into its CSS, and then we use the property color. This property changes the color. In this case, we are using it to change it into blue. Then again, we are modifying that same element, the CSS, and we use the property font family. With this property, we are changing the font family and we are setting it into Arial. Then again, doing the same, we use another property and we are changing the font size and we set it into larger. And here's the difference. This is how it looked before modifying the DOM and after. So I was using methods and properties to manipulate the DOM in my examples. We can access all of these elements in JavaScript with the set of properties and methods the DOM API provides. Here we have some examples of some very popular methods and property. I was using the getElementById method, the inner HTML property. We are also familiar with the querySelector method and the createElement method. There are other methods. For example, there is the append method, the appendChild method, which we can use after creating an element. When do we need the DOM? We may need the DOM when an event occurs. An event occurs when the user interacts in some way with an HTML element. JavaScript can be executed when an event occurs, like when a user clicks on an HTML element. To execute code when a user clicks on an element, for example, we add JavaScript code to an HTML event attribute, which is onClick. This is an event that occurs when a click happens. So the syntax would be write it on click and then setting the JavaScript. Here I have an example in which an event occurs and we apply DOM manipulation. So I have a bottom. Here's the bottom. It says click me. So I created an event, the onClick event. I add it to the bottom, and when this event occurs, I want this JavaScript to happen. This JavaScript gets the element through its ID1, gets into the CSS, and then uses the color property and set it into red. So this element would turn into red when this event happens. Here we have it. The HTML tag text content became red. And that's an example of how we can use DOM manipulation when an event occurs.